Now, before I get into the breakdown of what the Black Boule is, we need to go back in time. Let's go back to the times of slavery. During the times of slavery, we had plantations. This was large farms in the colonies of America that used the enforced labor of slaves to harvest crops like cotton, rice, indigo, sugar, tobacco, and other farm produce for trade and export around the world. This trade and export was how America was built. On this plantation, we had two different classes or groups of people. We had the masters and the slaves. There was no crossing between these classes. A master never became a slave, and a slave never became a master. Well, that's not entirely true. Eventually, there were slaves that became slave owners. But I don't want to get off point. I'm talking about the majority. I'm not going to talk too much about the masters, but more about the slaves. To keep the slaves in line and know exactly what the slaves were thinking or plotting, the masters needed help. They needed allies within the ranks of slaves. So in the slave class, they created two other classes. There were the regular slaves and then the house slaves, the house Negros, which really is known by another word that I will not use. The house slaves were taken in the house, given better food and accommodations. They were treated better and were more aligned with the slave masters than they were with their own people. They were used by the slave masters to keep the slaves in line. The slave masters might not have been able to keep the slaves in line without the house slaves. It even became a goal for some of the slaves to be able to come inside and become house slaves themselves. Now, on top of that, the slave masters would also have babies with the house slaves. They would never be equal, but they were not the bottom class slaves that had nothing and had to work outside eating the scraps. I think you get the picture. And I think for the most part, everyone should understand what the house slaves were. Now, here's the question I want you to think about. After slavery, and after they reprogrammed the slaves to believe that they were free, do you think that the position of house slave went away? Do you think that the slave masters, those that were running and building this country, did away with this house slave position that allowed them to keep tabs and control of the black community by just controlling a small few of them? The answer should be no. But here's the problem. Whether you ever thought about that question or not, you probably have not been exposed to the how. You might just call out a few names that you've seen on television that were obviously cooning and say that's what a modern house slave is. But you probably still have not been fully exposed to the real answer. And that's what we're going to talk about. Here's the irony and obvious reprogramming of today. During the times of slavery, though there were a few slaves that wanted to become house slaves, the majority of the slaves despised the house slaves. They did not trust or like them. Now, fast forward to our current modern times. Today, we praise the house slaves, and they are now our heroes. It's because we have been reprogrammed and reconditioned to love and accept our chains. And our goals are now to get in the house instead of breaking free. It's really deep and scary. Now, before I get into the breakdown of what within the ranks of the Masons were an educated bourgeois class of black men that looked at themselves as elite compared to the rest of the other Masons. They wanted to be separated and distinguished from all the other Masons. And the ruling class of America, the elite families that are still the unseen hands of this world, needed a source of recruitable Negroes to assist them with their plan to assimilate the Negroes into this new world that they were building. So from that need, there was a new subsection of the underground world of Negroes that was made to be the gatekeepers of Black America. On their website, yes, they do have a website, they say this about themselves. Sigma Pi Phi fraternity is also known as the Boule, which in ancient Greece was a council of chiefs. The meaning of the words Sigma Pi Phi, the titles given to its members and their wives, its officers, and the names of its local units are derived from Greek history and tradition as well. In its early years, Sigma Pi Phi could be viewed as a secret organization that consciously avoided publicity. It was not until 1982 that the fraternity adopted a policy of limited and selective publicity. Although no longer secret, Today, it can be described as a fraternity that exists with little fanfare and one that actively seeks to improve the lives of the citizens in the communities in which the members are associated through its social action and public policy programs and initiatives. From its founding in 1904, with 6 members in the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Sigma Pi Phi fraternity has deliberately grown slowly, as the emphasis has always been on quality and not quantity. Yet, it currently has nearly 5,000 active members who are affiliated with 134 member boulets in cities across the breadth of this nation and in Nassau, the Bahamas, and London, the United Kingdom. It has welcomed and continues to welcome into its fraternal bond some of the most distinguished men in the world. Its members have included such men as W.E.B. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, Martin Luther King Jr., Benjamin E. Mays, Ralph J. Bunche, James Weldon Johnson, Charles R. Drew, Daniel Hale Williams, Percy L. Julian, Charles H. Wesley, Oliver W. Hill, Paul R. Williams, John Hope Franklin, A. Leon Higginbotham, Ulysses K., Arna Bontemps, Arthur Ashe, David H. Blackwell, Robert C. Weaver, Ronald H. Brown, and the list goes on and on. Its past as well as its present members have been and are leaders in the struggle for civil rights, social justice, economic and educational equality, and in the implementation of public policy and healthcare initiatives that aid our underserved communities. And that's what they tell you on their website. They have apparently taken this fact off of their website, but in Boule member Charles Wesley's book, History of Sigma Pi Phi, a book that I will be quoting from often in this video. In the book, when speaking about the founder Henry Minton, who I will speak on more briefly, Wesley writes this about Minton. His dream and ambition were to organize a Greek letter fraternity and to have its members not to be selected on the basis of brains alone, but in addition to congeniality, culture, and good fellowship, that they should have behind them a record of accomplishment, not merely be men of promise and good education. In summary, Minton wanted to create an organization which would partake, in his own words, of the tenets of Skull and Bones at Yale and Phi Beta Kappa. Yeah, so you can see now in this age of information why they would have removed that from their site. If you remember, Skull and Bones was a secret society that both George Bush and John Kerry claimed to be part of in the 2004 presidential election.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
wild.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the red.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look
Are
forward...
you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us? Not much, because it's a secret.
They were in the same secret society, but could not tell us anything about it. Within the ranks of the Masons were an educated bourgeois class of black men that looked at themselves as elite compared to the rest of the other Masons. Sigma Pi Phi was the first black Greek letter fraternity before all the more widely known fraternities in the black community were created. During the beginning of the 20th century, the early 1900s, there were established Negro professionals. By the beginning of the year 1900, the total number of Negro college graduates had been increased to 7,488. The majority of this group had come from the Southern colleges, although there was an important minority who had graduated from Northern colleges. After these men who held bachelor's degree, the number of graduate and professional degrees was relatively much smaller. The census of 1900 showed that the Negro population was steadily building an improved economic, educational, and social status. One of the areas in the country that this status was improving in was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Anyways, the city of Philadelphia ranked high in the list of those giving work opportunities to the Negro population. Remember, Pennsylvania was a northern state, and the proportion of free blacks in Philadelphia before the Civil War was greater than in any other city in the North. In the year 1900, when counting black men, there were in a single ward of Philadelphia 7 teachers, 5 lawyers, 6 physicians, 22 clergymen, and 3 dentists. This was the beginning of the rise of the Negro professional in America. There were 3 major socio-economic Negro groups in Philly. The first was a small group of professional persons who were the physicians, dentists, lawyers, teachers, pastors, executives of business enterprises. A second group included the skilled and semi-skilled industrial workers and the larger number of domestic servants. And the third group was the vast majority, and they were comprised of the class that was considered unskilled laborers who were in poverty and had low income, living in congested areas of the cities, what we call ghettos. Here's an important point Wesley notes in his book. The lives of most of the 2 latter groups revolved around the church, the lodge, and the beneficial society. He says, during the last decade of the 19th century, there were 19 lodges of Masons, 6 chapters of the Eastern Star, 5 commanderies, 3 of the Scottish Rite, and 1 drill corps. There were lodges of the Knights of Pythias, Oddfellows, Galilean fishermen, and other important organizations based upon fraternal ties. Churches have been organized and have flourishing memberships and were influencing the people in the development of self-respect and self-support. The churches and lodges had property valued at over $1 million at the time. Now, I gave you all that information so you can understand what the times were like. It's important to understand all of it. Henry M. Minton, founder of Sigma Pi Phi, was educated and a professional. He had the first drugstore operated by Negroes in Philadelphia. He later became a doctor, graduating from Jefferson Medical College. There were Greek letter fraternities in the institutions which he had attended, but Negroes were excluded from their membership. At that time, no Greek letter fraternities had been organized by Negroes. Now, the book says Minton's ambition drove him to take leadership in the creation of a fraternity among men of like ideals and attributes, and to build an affiliation of selected college men who had made achievements in their careers and their community. And this is when Sigma Pi Phi was created. Sigma Pi Phi was created. Now, the other black Greek organizations were created shortly after. The Divine Nine were catered to mostly undergrads, those obtaining bachelor's degrees. But Sigma Pi Phi, the oldest of all the Greek organizations, catered to the men in their post-college years. This fraternity was planned for men who were graduates of college and were engaged in professional activities in their communities. In Minton's words, there were many men in the community of good training, intelligence, and culture and congeniality who were not intimately acquainted with one another. For the good of themselves and the community, they should be gathered together in some kind of organization. So let me put that very simply. These men serve themselves. It's a common idea in the black community that many of us are like crabs in a barrel. No one can rise because we're always pulling each other down. These men should be credited with the creation of that condition in our community. Sigma Pi Phi. The historic birth date of Sigma Pi Phi is May 15th, 1904. This is their Founders Day. It was at this time the concept of Boule was formed. Boule, also known as the Council of the Chiefs, the leading noblemen, or the heads of families. The Boule of Homeric times was a body of princes who were advisory to the king. The question we should ask ourselves is, who was this Boule council and advisors to? History will show that they were advisors of dealing and keeping the black community in check. Yeah. Now, another word used more generally than Boule was the word archon. They use that word often and is mainly a title for their members. They say this designation was a title given to the highest magistrate in Athens and many ancient Greek states. But in a simple search, like in the Britannica, you can see that in Gnosticism, archons are actually more like demons, fallen angels that are servants to the demiurge, Satan. The archons are tyrannical and limiting agencies who rule over humanity and creation in order to enhance their own self-importance and glory. Yeah, so the name is fitting on why they call themselves this. But they do not rule over humanity, just over the black community in America. Now, their books do not mention that they took orders from others in higher positions that were not necessarily in the community of race. But if you understand the underworld, you understand this is how it was. They said that they wanted to be like Skull and Bones, and those societies all were under the leadership of the family bloodlines that held power over centuries. Now, I will stop with the history. If you want to know more about them, they are an important subject you should know and research. Ask a majority of your parents and grandparents about Sigma Pi Phi or the Boule, and I guarantee a majority of them would not know of them. They made sure that they were very secretive and under the radar. But though they were not very well known, they were the actual gatekeepers of the black community, and the heights of success that we see in America today in the black community did not happen without them. And so as their influence and power spread secretly among the black community, they then became what we ultimately decided were our life goals. Without knowing the fraternity that our black leaders were associated with, like Prince Hall Freemasonry and the Boule, we just knew about their success, and they later became our standard and what we were trying to strive to be like. You see, here's the deal. When money, power, fame, and wealth are the primary drivers of our lives, it's very easy to implant those that have been given keys to the kingdom as our examples and who we would like to be like. It's because we're only looking at few things: the money, power, fame, and wealth. It's how Instagram models have become a center of influence in today's world. Early on in the Boule, these men were included not only by their status and success, but also by their skin tone. Many of these men could also pass for white men, which made them able to be accepted easier amongst those in control. These are the founders of the Boule. You've heard of the brown paper bag test. These were the actual men that were actually giving this brown paper bag test in the beginning. It's very deep. The white ruling class of the country made them very rich and offered them opportunities of education and status, which carried with it the tradition of the Western/Eastern American civilization. Basically, they had freed the Negroes, but they needed a way to draw them into American culture instead of creating their own thing in America, which is what the black community tried to do. They tried to do their own thing. So after the white ruling class gained backing in the black community through their Masonic fraternal organizations, they then got pickier and chose the ones that were going to be the examples for the black community to try to eventually emulate. After these men were solidified, then they create a civil rights campaign that teaches the black community to assimilate instead of set ourselves apart. The Boule was tasked with many different roles and purposes. One of the first elite members of the Boule was W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois is quoted as saying, "The Boule was to keep the professional blacks away from Garvey." Marcus Garvey started the grass movement. His idea was to make America start a settlement in Liberia to control rubber crops and other natural resources. One of Marcus Garvey's most famous quotes was, "Why should not Africa give to the world its black Rockefeller, Rothschild, and Henry Ford? Now is the opportunity. Now is the chance for every Negro to make every effort toward a commercial, industrial standard that will make us comparable with the successful businessmen of other races." So obviously you can see that he was not a favorite of the elite. Now, around 1918, which were the early stages of Boule, Garvey's Back to Africa movement, through his newspaper The Negro World, was reaching over 1 million diasporic Africans, largely in North America, without TV or radio. Du Bois was tasked with stealing the black professionals from the influence of Garvey, because in short, it went against the ultimate agenda. So Du Bois established his Boule chapter in New York, and the rise of black civic organizations happened, like the NAACP, the Urban League, and 100 Black Men. The main point I am making is that this elite class of black men, who were extremely picky about who they included, did not do their own bidding. These men were sold out to the satanic elite class already controlling America, and they were the house Negroes that regulated the black community all the way until we are now at the time when they are our heroes, yet we know nothing about their organization and the roles that they actually played.
These type of people...
The historic birth